Welcome, everybody. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Andrew Shaw, the Rugby Development Officer for Sask Rugby, also serving as chair of the Rules of Competition Committee, and that's the capacity that I am in here for you guys tonight. Myself and Joel Briere, the president of Sask Rugby, will be presenting tonight on what's in the Sask Rugby Rules of Competition, what they are, what you and your clubs and teams need to know ahead of the season that's coming up. So you will notice from my voice and Joel's when he is on, we're both a little raspy these days. Myself from yelling at kids in gyms, trying to grow the sport of rugby. And Joel's a little under the weather as well. So I'm going to try to save him as much talking as possible here. So unless Joel, you got something to chime in, we will get things kicked off.
No, I'm okay with that introduction.
Awesome. Oh, just making sure I've got my slideshow queued up properly. Okay. Excellent. Just need to share that screen for you guys. Excellent. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to go over the rules of competition, what they are, what you guys need to know ahead of the upcoming season. If you do have a question at any point before we start, I do welcome you to raise your hand, and we will try to address those when they come up with the relevant topic. But we will have time at the end for that as well. So first question that you might have about the rules of competition is, what are they? That's a pretty fair question. The rules of competition are the specific rules that govern competitions in Saskatchewan that are sanctioned by Sask Rugby. So sanctioned competitions include the regular Division 1, Division 2, Junior and Sevens leagues that run in Saskatchewan. So unless you are only playing in exhibition matches or tournaments, which still require sanctioning by Rugby Canada, by the way. So unless you're only playing in those, this policy will apply to you and your club or team throughout the year. The rules of competition are publicly available at saskrugby.com/ROC. I do recommend that you bookmark that link and or download the policy from the site. The webpage also includes relevant information and links for some of the specific clauses within the policy, such as the playoff eligibility exemption application form and others. So at this point, I want to give you guys all the obligatory friendly reminder. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse should your club violate the rules at some point during the season. Unlike George Costanza here, clubs cannot plead ignorance, and it's your responsibility to know, understand, and follow the rules of competition if your club or team is going to participate in the sanctioned competitions that you want to. Good news is that you're here today, enhancing your knowledge of the policy. So for you guys, this reminder is probably a bit redundant, but I would be amiss if I didn't say it. So before we get into the rules themselves, we want to briefly cover some of the reasons why the rules are written the way that they are. As you read through the policy, most of the provisions within the policy can be rationalized under one of the following reasons. The specific reason for a clause in the policy might be very nuanced itself, but there's a strong likelihood that it falls under one of these three categories. The categories are competition integrity. So over the years, clubs have asked for certain rules to exist to respond to specific ways that other clubs have tried to gain an unfair advantage in the competition. Second reason is insurance, sanctioning, and safety. So some provisions are included to promote player safety and to cover the you-know-whats of clubs in the cases of injury or liability. Third one, organization and operations. Other provisions, such as forfeit rules and specified deadlines, exist to ensure that sufficient notice is given to make changes to plans or to cover costs where insufficient notice was given. We've included this slide at the beginning of the presentation for you to keep this as context as we roll through all of the specific detailed rules that you'll need to know. You're certainly welcome to ask why something is the way that it is, but these reasons might answer some of those questions up front. So over to you, Joel.
Yeah, just before I get to my own slide here, just also to touch on that, it's important to note that the rules are the rules. So if you are questioning why a rule is the way it is, that's totally understandable. But if the rule is written a certain way, then we still have to be following it. The first slide I've got here is for the code of conduct. I kept this brief because the code of conduct is not. Everyone should be familiar with it. You have to sign it when you register. I know everyone reads all 40 pages we get when we register, but everyone is bound by the code of conduct. Anyone who registers with Sask Rugby, and it has a massive scope. It's probably the most comprehensive code of conduct I've ever seen, which is why I'm not getting into details about it now. This is just kind of a reminder that you should be familiar with it. And that it applies to pretty much everything we do. There are provisions even for like off-field activities. So just be aware of the code of conduct and then operate with the knowledge that you should be working within the confines of that code of conduct all the time. We can go to the next slide, Andrew. So the first point, a couple of my points are rules. I word this. They've always been rules. They're maybe not always enforced, but they're items that Sask Rugby or individuals have noticed, and we'd like to see teams start to enforce their knowledge of the rules on themselves so that Sask Rugby doesn't have to start enforcing the rules, if that makes sense. So I'm not trying to say that Sask Rugby is going to have a massive crackdown on controlling your own spectators, but I think it would be nice for everyone involved if teams started to take responsibility for their spectators on their own so that that isn't necessary. It's right in the World Rugby Law book that teams are responsible for their spectators. Some key points here are that spectators are bound by the code of conduct. A team can be sanctioned for unruly spectators. An individual does not need to be wearing team colors or be explicit about their support of a specific team for the team to be held responsible. And what that means is if we know that someone is with your team because it's a small community, that's good enough. They don't have to be wearing your jersey or anything like that. And then just the last point that is, it's important that our sport be perceived as family friendly. We should not have people on the sidelines harassing, swearing, yelling at refs or players. If you can't enjoy a rugby game without screaming at people on the pitch, then I think it's time to rethink your priorities anyway. So yeah, just a reminder that teams are responsible for their own spectators. Next slide, Andrew. So this is the playing enclosure. This is one we had a couple issues with last year, and this is another one that's a clarification. This has always been a law and a rule. The playing enclosure is the field, and the only people allowed in the playing enclosure, and that includes your team's box on the sidelines, are players and referees, registered coaches, registered club members for the purpose of providing a service like running water, and medical staff and the media. There cannot be any fans or alumni, and there should not be players that are not named in your squad either. It should be a maximum of 23 people there. Specifically, I'd like to point out that you cannot have, for example, a random old boy running your bench. That's in no way insured. If something were to happen, the liability of that, if they're not a registered coach, they put somebody injured back on the field, for example, we're liable for that. So it's just not an option. The only people that are allowed on your bench are your roster for that day, your water runners, and I think trainers. And yeah, that is it. Next slide. The discipline policy. So the discipline policy, Sask Rugby did in last night, actually. It is almost entirely just a clarification. Essentially, president of Sask Rugby, so myself, I'm the chair of the discipline committee, the red card discipline committee. And the policies that we were working from were hacked together from 3 or 4 different policies. So I kind of just consolidated that and made all flow a little more smoothly. The key points here would be that when a player receives a red card, they should immediately leave the playing enclosure and refrain from participating in rugby activities, including training until advised to resume. That actually does include in the policy that, like, you should not be arguing with anyone, your team, the other team, the referee. If you've received a red card, it's your duty to leave the pitch immediately. The match official has the duty to briefly explain why you're being removed. And if you're not happy with that explanation, you can follow up later calmly. But in the moment, you do have the expectation to leave. You are also suspended from rugby activity until your red card has been reviewed and the discipline committee has cleared you to return to play. Under decisions and appeals, there's actually a typo there. Decisions made by the discipline committee are considered final, and appeals may be submitted with a $100 bond. We actually just changed that bond amount. The purpose of that bond is to prevent frivolous appeals of the discipline policy, and we found that that $100 bond was not serving that function. So in line with the rules of competition bond, it's now $300, and $150 is returned if the appeal is successful, if the decision is overturned. It used to be 100 with a 100% refund, but unfortunately, it was kind of like every club was appealing every decision, and then most of the time it was myself or Jordan just explaining why an appeal wasn't relevant in that situation anyway, because there are only 2 incidences in which you can appeal a decision by the discipline committee, because the discipline committee does not determine fault ever. The match official's red card is, for lack of a better term, like a guilty verdict. The discipline committee does not say, oh, you didn't break the law. You did. The discipline committee just determines an appropriate sanction. So an appeal would only be for the length of the suspension, and you can only appeal if, I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but it would be if there's new and pertinent information relevant to the situation that wasn't available to the committee at the time they made the decision, or if the match official committee or someone else on the list has overstepped their bounds. Christy, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could clarify. You said that they're to refrain from participating in rugby activities. Does that include spectating games as well, or are they allowed to spectate games?
Spectatorship, to the best of my knowledge, is not included in participation. It's a good question. You cannot play, coach, referee, train, any on-field activities. I would say spectating, I'm trying to remember the exact word. I don't believe spectating is listed, so I think you can spectate. I would just mention that, you know, if you were being belligerent in the stands during a suspension, then you are still, you know, at risk of a further disciplinary action, because, but it would be under the other discipline policy, the code of conduct one. But
awesome, thank you so much.
I can just add on to that.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, in terms of like when the discipline committee meets and determines the length of a suspension, the actions of the individual after they leave the field is still a relevant consideration in terms of the entry point of the suspension. So for those of you familiar with the World Rugby regulations, most foul play suspensions recommendations have a low point, midpoint, and high point for the entry level of the suspension. And there's a number of factors that go into that, but one of them is what the player does after they have received the red card. So just to add context to what Joel was saying in terms of further belligerent action being taken into consideration.
Yeah. This last point is it's not new, but it's kind of new to us. We actually, we at Sask Rugby weren't aware of this until we got notice of one in another sport, and now we are aware of it, and we'll of course be following it. So Sask Rugby, as a member of Sask Sport, has a duty to report any long-term suspensions to Sask Sport. So long-term is considered 12 months plus. And what Sask Sport actually does is communicates those long-term bans to all member organizations of Sask Sport. And what that boils down to is if you've got a 14-month ban in rugby, you are also banned from every other sport that Sask Sport governs, which is pretty much all of them, which is pretty significant. And like I said, that's not something that's new, but it is something that we were just made aware of. I think it maybe just didn't come up for a number of years because obviously 1-year bans are not super frequent. And then what I believe actually happened was Jordan got an email from Sask Sport saying, hey, this person was banned. And we're like, oh, we're supposed to be doing that. So that's going to happen going forward. Hopefully nobody gets banned for a year. But that we're all aware of that now, I guess. I think that's it for that slide. That's Andrew's going to take over for a minute. Does anyone have any quick questions? I'm conscious of time tonight. Any quick questions about anything that I've covered?
Sorry, Joel, just clarifying on the other page when you said that registered players are allowed in the box. So do we have to as a referee, are you specifying if those people are water people? Because there's the 23 registered, and then sometimes they have 1 or 2 that show up to the game and they're like, oh, we're running water. Do they have to specify that prior to the game, or is
Water
that just not allowed?
should always be marked anyway.
Okay.
They should either be not in kit or wearing pennies. And
Okay.
that's in I believe in World Rugby laws. If it's not, it's best practice. So if your team doesn't have 2 yellow pennies, I'll spot you some.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Anyone else?
Excuse me, I've got a question. Do all red cards automatically go before this suspension review committee?
Yes.
Okay.
And
that
has always been the case.
How often do they meet to review these? I'm just thinking if you're in a weekend tournament or something, you get a red card on Saturday morning and you have a game Sunday. Are you automatically out Sunday until they review it then?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
And to answer your question about how often we meet, due to the nature of the discipline committee, it's within 3 days of a red card being issued. That is a best practice. I can tell you last year we didn't exceed that. We were within 1 or 2 days every time, but we don't meet regularly because we essentially just scramble a meeting when we need to review a red card.
And for some context on Rufus's question as well, if you are in a festival or a sevens tournament, especially in sevens, your red card is automatically for the duration of that event anyway. So in your scenario, red card Saturday morning, can they play on Sunday? That's usually a write-off anyway, based on the laws of the game.
Christy?
Just kind of jumping back to Viggs's question and kind of jumping on that one. For players in the box and registered players in the box, who is policing that or checking on that?
Well, we hope that clubs, I mean, the major purpose of this meeting is that clubs start to take this responsibility for themselves. Like I said, we don't want to have to start cracking down on little things like this. We would prefer that clubs just be aware of these rules and adhere to them going forward. So we don't currently have like an officer that is, you know, following clubs around, ensuring that the rules of competition are being followed. I guess there wouldn't be anyone enforcing it in the moment. What the potential consequence is that if you've broken one of the rules of competition and your opposition were to protest or bring that up to Sask Rugby through the appropriate channels, there's potential there for discipline or something as extreme as forfeiture or something like that. Like it would more than likely be handled after the fact in that way. Does that answer your question?
Yep. I was just wondering if the number 4 AR would be a potential person to kind of do it as they're in charge of subs and stuff, but I wasn't sure if they'd have access to Sport Lomo.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. The number 4 official would be the perfect person to do that. I'm not off the top of my head like familiar with how often we have a number 4 to say concretely that it would be that person. But yeah, it would be a great thing for them to keep an eye on if they were aware of it. Yeah. Gary Harley, to answer your question, the individuals allowed in players box are the players. Oh, Andrew, you're telling them to check I'll go over it one more time though. The players named on the roster for that game, your registered coaches, registered club members for the purposes of running water or training, your medical staff, and media. The key people who are not in there that we tend to see sometimes sneaking in there would be, classic one is old boy volunteers helping run the bench. That can't happen. It's an insurance risk. Players not named in the squad, obviously it's not as much of an insurance risk, but it is right there in the World Rugby laws. So they shouldn't be there either, unless a couple of them are running water.
I think if you want to simplify that list down, it should be you are registered within the Rugby Canada system and you are serving a specific purpose for that match.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Okay, we can move on to Andrew's next slide.
Okay, so all the topics that we just covered, that Joel touched on, they all assume that your club has passed all of the eligibility requirements to participate in a sanctioned competition. And yes, there are requirements that your club needs to fulfill in order to participate. I assume that most of these minimum requirements are not going to be a stumbling block for our clubs. I can't think of any in my time here in the province that I even had a question about whether somebody has fulfilled it. But I do want to run over them quickly for you. So first, to be eligible to participate in a Sask Rugby sanctioned competition, clubs or teams must complete a member organization registration form and pay the associated registration fee. This is done on a per club basis, not on a per team basis. So if you are, say, a men's team in Saskatoon and you're entering a team in Division 1 and Division 2, you are submitting one of those forms for your club, not one form per team that you're entering. Second, your club must pay all team fees to Sask Rugby and your respective subunion by the specified due dates. Sask Rugby's team fees are due by May 1st for junior teams and June 1st for senior teams. Section 3.2.2 of the rules covers this in detail. And then you will also need to check with your subunion, so that's either the RRU or NSRU, for the fees that they will charge. These fees are charged on a per team basis. So again, to use our example of a club with a Div 1 and a Div 2 team, you might be paying team fees to your subunion for both of those team entries. Third, your club must have a minimum number of registered players in order to enter a competition. Section 3.2.5 specifies the minimum number for each competition type. So it used to just be a flat number, but we've broken this down now to cover 15s, 10s, 7s, which are the three primary competition types that we play here in the province. Just so that there's a little bit more flexibility for teams that maybe are teams and clubs that are maybe only looking to play 7s, that they don't need to meet a higher standard for a game that requires those players. So this only refers to players registered in Sport Lomo and not the number of players that need to be on the pitch to start a match. That comes much later on. So finally, number 4 here, your club must have at least one coach registered with Rugby Canada, i.e. via Sport Lomo, regardless of the competition type. This coach does not need to be present for all club activities. I mean, that's best practice. But your club needs to demonstrate responsibility by having a properly registered and certified coach. And we'll touch on what that certified piece means in a moment. So before talking about those coach bits, though, we'll talk about player registration. There are some very simple aspects to the rules around player registrations and some more complicated ones. Very simple is as follows. All players that participate in matches for your club must be registered with an appropriate Rugby Canada and Sask Rugby playing membership via Sport Lomo. Emphasis on the playing. If you have this completed, 90% of your worries are covered. As a club, you're responsible for ensuring that players are properly registered, and I would highly recommend viewing the quote-unquote fine print on each person's registration page in Sport Lomo before their first match. If their status in Sport Lomo shows anything other than active or payment received, then they are not eligible to participate. I can show you where to find this detail kind of at the end if you guys need a quick tutorial on that. I'm not going to bog us down now, switching over to Sport Lomo. We can go back to that afterwards. You should also be making sure that your players are properly registered prior to participating in any rugby activity with your club. This isn't required by the rules of competition, but it does cover your butts as a club should anything happen at a practice that results in an injury. This might also come back to bite a player if their playoff eligibility is affected by a rugby-related injury sustained while practicing as an unregistered player. So you should be making sure that everybody participating in your training is registered. Your training is how should I put it, is assumed to be a sanctioned rugby event covered by the Rugby Canada insurance. So all the rules that apply to that for games are technically also in effect for practices. Just wanted to remind you guys of that. So the rules of competition do specify that players may only play for one Division 1 club at a time. However, players may compete for a separate Division 2 club from the club that they compete a separate Division 2 club from the club that they compete in for Division 1. These players must complete the process for dual membership in Sport Lomo, which allows them to appear in the membership of both clubs simultaneously and be added to team sheets. In the past, we grandfathered that with guest players, but we really want people to be using that dual membership properly so they appear properly for both clubs. So players who want to switch teams mid-season can request a transfer through the Sport Lomo system. Again, we've got to do this through the system so that the registrations are properly transferring. The full transfer process from club and provincial approval to paying the team dues for the new club must be completed before the player plays in matches for the new team. The player cannot compete in any matches while the transfer in progress, as they're technically unattached to any team at that time. A player can make only one transfer request per season to prevent players transferring back and forth between clubs to gain a competitive advantage. An individual who does not have an active membership, for example, if my 2021 registration expired on April 30th, 2022, and I had not already re-registered for 2022, I would not have an active membership on May 2nd, 2022. Anybody where they don't have that active membership, they do not need to complete a transfer to join a different club. Any questions about the player registration stuff? Cool. Okay. We'll go back to Joel for the next one.
I just have one question there, Andrew.
Yep.
You just said you can't compete for 2 Division 1 teams in a calendar year, but then we're talking about making transfers mid-season. So can you just clarify that?
So that's specifically that you can't play for them at the same time. So if you've completed a transfer, you are not representing those teams at the same time. So the scenario where you'd be representing at the same time would be if I was registered with the Grads and then I decided that I was going to throw on a Highlanders jersey and go play without transferring my registration. If I transfer that, I can play for that other club. Sorry.
Okay.
I should have clarified that at being at the same time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. You're up, Joel.
Okay, coaching requirements. I'm not telling that joke, Andrew. Appreciate the script, but so the following is required to coach rugby in Saskatchewan. You require the Respect in Sport certification, the World Rugby Rugby Ready online module, the World Rugby Concussion Management for the general public online module, and you must be registered as a coach within Rugby Canada and Sask Rugby via the Sport Lomo registration system. If you're working with U18 athletes, you also require a criminal record vulnerable sector check. The World Rugby modules are good for 2 years, and then you have to retake them. Sask Rugby does not require Respect in Sport to be retaken. If your coaches are coaching multiple sports and one has a restart requirement, they may be prompted to retake the course via their respected sport account. Sask Rugby has the ability to check on the status of these certifications via World Rugby Passport and Respect in Sport site. So clubs should ensure that their coaches have proper certifications in place prior to representing clubs in games. As discussed previously, there are potential consequences for clubs, teams that do not have properly registered and certified coaches. Yeah, it boils down to you require a coach to have a rugby team. I'd like to add here that we also, for a little inside information, Sask Rugby gets funding partially based on how many registrations we have that aren't just players. So that's coaches, match officials, etc. So what I've been encouraging my teammates to do is get their coaching certification and register as a coach as well. I just tell them they don't have to coach a team, but then they can serve as a backup coach should one not be able to show up. And they help us get more MAP grant funding because, again, the more coaches we register, the more MAP grant money we get. It's that simple. More coaches, more money. And MAP grant funding, as you all know, goes to the clubs. That directly benefits yourselves. Andrew, do you have an answer for Leon?
I'm just responding to that. I'll just respond out loud if you're prompting. That's going to be a question that I'm going to have to direct back to Jordan. He would be the one issuing that letter if indeed it were possible. So I will have to I'll have to kick that one over to him, and I can find out an answer for everybody.
Yeah, I can say that if it's as simple as you suspect it is and you just need a letter requesting it, then we will do that. So we'll just have to check in, see if that, oh, I'm gonna cough, hang on a second.
So
Sorry.
on
Bear
Taylor's
with me.
question here, so these requirements are needed for teams entering sanctioned competitions. There are no mini/minor sanctioned competitions that are covered by the rules of competition policy. So you're not technically required to have all of this. It is, however, in your best interest to have all of this for your coaches. Everything that is on this list is self-directed. Respect in Sport, the World Rugby online modules are all free. So there are very few barriers to entry, but technically they are not required for like minis and minors community programs. Juniors, yes. Seniors, yes, because they are entering sanctioned competitions.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone have any more questions about coaching requirements? I should just say one more thing. If your coach, in quotation marks, doesn't meet these requirements, they're not a coach and they should not be providing on-field guidance to a team for insurance reasons. Because again, just from a liability perspective, if you have someone that doesn't meet the requirements and they say, you know, go into that tackle with your head down and somebody gets hurt, well, then, you know, there's potentially some liability there. So it's best just not to take any chances with that. Okay, next slide, please. So these are team responsibilities, specifically to match day team responsibilities. So each team is expected to supply a game ball. It's not the be all and end all, but every team should be showing up prepared to play a game. The designated home team is responsible to ensure that the fields are properly marked and the posts are protected. For Regina and Saskatoon clubhouses, this primarily means setting up flags, markers, and post pads. I mean, I think everyone's familiar with the local requirements of those two facilities. This also includes ensuring that there's separation between the playing enclosure and the spectator areas. I see that's listed there, Andrew. That's a little tricky in Regina anyway. We might need to look into
that. So I think for the purposes of our game here in the province, like technically the laws of the game require you to have at least a rope barrier, but for us, I think we want to just make clear that this is the area that spectators should be in, and this is the area that the game is going to take place on. So when we go back to that comment or the slide earlier about the playing enclosure and who is allowed on there and who is not, we want to have a clear idea for the people coming to watch our sport where they should be and where they shouldn't be. I don't think for us here in Saskatchewan, we need to be worried about physical barriers and infrastructure. We need to be worried more about making sure people know where they should be and where they shouldn't be in whatever form that takes for you.
Okay. All home teams are responsible for ensuring there are adequate change facilities for the teams participating. For teams hosting games outside of Saskatoon and Regina, or for those teams without a dedicated rugby clubhouse, shower facilities are recommended to be provided, but are no longer mandatory. So off the top of my head, Moose Jaw, that would apply to. I'm not sure if we've got anyone from Moose Jaw in here. Yeah. Jerseys. The rules of competition actually require that senior Div 1 teams be in matching shorts, socks, and jerseys numbered 1 to 23. That's a little confining. In practice, teams should make sure that the jerseys and shorts match and that players are properly numbered on the team sheet. For example, if somebody retired number 4 on your team, this is a random example, and somebody's wearing 44 instead, that's not really a problem. You should avoid duplicate numbers though, and whatever that player is named on the team sheet, on the roster, they should be wearing. And then, yeah, I mean, the matching shorts, you know, is anyone going to come down on you for wearing different shorts? No, but I mean, we can make an effort to be matchy and look good, have a little bit of professionalism.
I think the big thing there is just avoiding it being unclear what player is playing for what team.
Mm-hmm. The home team is responsible for changing jerseys in the event of a color conflict, as determined by the referee. If in doubt, it would be best to coordinate this with the opposing team before the match rather than needing to find a solution immediately prior to the match. I think, you know, for general play within the province, we've got a pretty good idea whose jerseys are close or that contrast. So basically the Rogues and the Wildouts should have a discussion before match day. I think that's the only one that comes to mind. Does anyone have any questions about team responsibilities? Okay, Andrew.
Okay, sorry, I'm just responding to a direct message in the chat. There we go. Okay, awesome. So next one up, so we just talked, Joel just kind of mentioned team sheets, so it's kind of natural that we flow into it. So we've got all our players registered, we got our certified coaches, match logistics have been sorted. All that's left is to name your roster and take the field. So the rules of competition require that all team sheets be filed via Sportlomo at least 15 minutes prior to kickoff. Paper game sheets will no longer be accepted except in extreme circumstances. An example of an extreme circumstance might be the entire internet going down so no one can access Sportlomo from any device. That's the scale of extreme that we're talking about. Your club is responsible to ensure that your team sheet is submitted properly and by the proper person within the club. We will run a tutorial session prior to the season to go over how to do this. And we encourage you to keep an eye out for this session and have multiple individuals attend so that your club is not reliant on a single person to file the team sheet properly. I know we've kind of gone through it last season with moving to the online, but if you're one person that can file the team sheet for your team that has the login information for your account is gone on vacation and out of cell phone contact, if you've got to change something, that makes it really tough. At the end of the match officials will log the game score on Sportlomo. I want to take this opportunity to introduce two concepts to you that's going to help you understand how the Rules of Competition Committee will apply the team sheets rules in the 2022 season. First concept is completeness. Team sheet is considered complete when the number of players named on the team sheet matches the number of players present at the start of the match. So if you have 18 players present at the start of the match and your team sheet has 18 players named, it is complete. The second concept is correctness. A team sheet is considered to be correct when all of the information on the team sheet reflects the facts of the game. So this includes players named in the proper positions, front row replacements named, jersey numbers matching those worn on the field. As an example, your team sheet may be complete, but if the player named at fullback wore number 24 rather than number 15, it's not correct unless you've made that change on the team sheet. The standard in the rules of competition is that a complete and correct team sheet will be submitted 15 minutes prior to kickoff. But given that we are still in a learning process with this, the committee has instituted a temporary policy for 2022. So this is for this coming season, only allowing a little bit more leeway so everybody can find their way within the system. So at the end of the 2022 season, these temporary rules will be reevaluated. And then if any of this is going to become permanent, then we'll make the specific change, the direct change to the policy. So there's two main temporary rules for 2022. First is to implement a warning system for clubs that fail to submit a complete team sheet 15 minutes prior to the match. This would include not submitting a team sheet at all, or an obviously incomplete team sheet, such as only naming 7 players for a 15s match. The first failure to submit a complete team sheet will result in a written warning from the Rules of Competition Committee. The second failure to submit a complete team sheet will result in a forfeit as per section 10 of the Rules of Competition. So it's basically you're getting one freebie that if you don't submit your team sheet by the start of the game, instead of that going to direct forfeit, you're getting one freebie. The second main temporary rule for 2022 is that every club will be given a 24-hour window following kickoff of the match to ensure that their team sheet is correct. So during this 24-hour period, teams will be allowed to edit their team sheets to make any last-minute adjustments, such as changing a player that did not appear, changing jersey numbers, etc. So that came up quite a few times in the 2021 season, where the team in question needs to make a last-minute change to their team sheet based on some circumstance that's happening. Sometimes it's even what person grabs what number jersey in the change room. You're now going to have 24 hours following kickoff of the match to make those changes so that it is correct. In both of these circumstances, a failure by the club to have a correct team sheet submitted more than 24 hours following kickoff will result in a forfeit. Again, as per section 10 of the Rules of Competition. So to be clear, the penalty for failure to have a correct team sheet after this 24-hour window will still be applied, even if you're getting your first warning that, one freebie for failure to commit or failure to submit a complete team sheet. So if it gets, just as a example to make it real clear, if it's 15 minutes before kickoff, you've forgotten to submit your team sheet. Okay, there's your one freebie. Well, the next one, you still need to get that team sheet finalized, completed, and have it correct within 24 hours. We still need a correct record of the match, even if you are being given that grace period. So this policy has been put in place for 2022 because the committee expects that teams are going to act in good faith by trying to submit correct team sheets by the specified deadline, and that if you're acting in good faith, that 24-hour window to edit should be sufficient to correct anything that has come up in the meantime. So we'll move on here from submitting team sheets to the contents of said sheets. It's important to note that all players from your club, all players that your club nominates on a team sheet must be present, dressed, and prepared to take the field in the match. Players who are not present will not have the game counted towards their playoff eligibility. And violation of this rule, including nominating non-qualified players as front row qualified, will result in further sanction from the Rules of Competition Committee. So no naming a player on your team sheet who's not even in the province, for instance. Our Rules of Competition emphasize that the laws of the game, and law number 3 in particular, when it comes to matters of the front row and uncontested scrums, In line with this law, the number of players that you can name on your roster for a match is determined by the number of front row replacements that you are able to name. So the chart on the slide here is directly from the laws of the game. It indicates how many qualified front row players must be named relative to the number of players named in total. The bad news is that this may limit the number of substitutes that you are able to name. The good news is that other players in your starting lineup, other than your original front row, can be nominated as your front row replacements as well. So you don't necessarily need to have 2 props on the bench if your number 8 can also go up to prop.
And if they're trained so safely.
Sorry, yes, yeah. And that kind of loops back to, or that actually goes to my next point here. We talked about kind of the ready, willing, and able, present, dressed, and prepared. Sorry, voice catching up with me. That also goes for players nominated as front row replacements. If you're nominating someone as a front row replacement, they must be prepared to play in the front row if called upon. So as a coach, this is why I mentioned coaches as being someone who would benefit from being here tonight. You need to be making sure that the players that you're naming as front row replacements are able to play that position safely, because if they're named on the team sheet as a front replacement, they need to be prepared to go into that position if required. Otherwise, we're talking about applying Law 3, and we're talking about further sanctions from the Rules of Competition Committee. We no longer have a rule requiring a forfeit for uncontested scrums, but anyone who watched the Six Nations match between Italy and Ireland can attest to the disadvantages that can apply when your team requires uncontested scrums and you're left scrambling for how to get another front row player on in order to make it happen. We want to kind of try to avoid that situation wherever possible. In divisions outside of men's Division 1, the rules stipulate that teams may agree to uncontested scrums, provided that they notify the match official of such prior to kickoff. You can't agree to that partway through the game, only before the game, and only with both teams agreeing and informing the match official. This is to be consistent with the game on principles that World Rugby has adopted and is pushing down to the national unions and the provincial and territorial unions below that. So, in order to start a match and avoid a forfeit, each team must ensure that a minimum number of players take the field to play the match. This rule is pretty straightforward. If your team does not have the minimum number of players from your own club available to start the match, you will sustain a forfeit. The chart on the slide shows the minimum number of players required by the category. For example, men's, women's, or juniors, and the competition type, 15, 10s, 7s. This chart is in the rules competition policy as well. And again, we're going to send the slides out after as well. So just keep in mind that this is the minimum number of people that you need to have on the field to start a match for each competition type. So you'll note on the previous slide that the minimum number of players for senior women's and junior 15-a-side competitions is 10 players per team. This minimum is intended such that we can keep games being played in divisions where player numbers have historically been a challenge. After all, the way to grow rugby is to offer playing opportunities to those that want them, not to cancel them. So we want to keep those games going on as much as possible. However, it's still desirable to have competitive matches, and 10 players playing against 15 will not be particularly competitive regardless of who the 10 players are. So as such, teams in the women's and juniors 15s competitions will use a player matching system to ensure that games remain competitive while still granting the team with proper numbers an advantage. The left-hand column of the chart on the slide here indicates the number of players that are available for the team with fewer players, and the right-hand column indicates the number of players that the team with a full roster should put onto the field to quote unquote match. As you can see, this results in the team with more players maintaining at least a 2-player advantage regardless of the specific numbers. Again, we want to have a competitive match, but we still want the team who is showing up with a full complement to have an advantage for their organization and commitment. So the rules of competition also requires teams to be responsible for the safety of their players, particularly those who are under 19 years of age. So section 8.1 of the rules of competition specifies the allowable game lengths for the most common age groups used in Saskatchewan. These lengths come directly from Rugby Canada's age grade law variations, which are implemented to ensure a safe competition environment for age grade players. Clubs should familiarize themselves with these law variations and apply them within their club. For instance, if you have a U19 player playing for your senior squad, which is allowed, more on in a second, it's best practice to limit them to 70 minutes of action, even if the senior game is 80 minutes in length. I'm seeing a couple comments in the chat, so I'm just going to pause here. So with new rugby laws, can our junior players be part of our senior roster if we don't have enough senior players? So they need to be approved first. So actually what you guys need to be aware of with regards to junior players playing senior rugby is the age branding requirements for 2022, which is the second item that you see on the slide. At the age grade level, i.e. junior minor, Rugby Canada has identified a 2-year age band as the most desirable competition format, with dispensation being available for players in the year above or below the age band. Well, this obviously impacts the age grade competitions in our province. Senior clubs should also be aware of the age cutoff for their competitions based on this banding. So the system is based on the year of birth, and as such, players born in 2004 or earlier, so that's 2004, 2003, 2002, so on and so forth. Anybody born in those years can play senior rugby in 2022 without the dispensation, which is that approval that Christy mentioned in the chat. The technical term is dispensation. Players born in 2005 can apply for dispensation to play senior rugby. Players born in 2006 or later, so 2006, 2007, 2008, so on, cannot play senior rugby in 2022 in any circumstances. So I strongly encourage you to read the link documents on the slide. So when I send the slides out, you'll be able to click on these 2 items before starting your club season, and that's including contact training. So I know, just to address it, I know there's lots of worry about junior players playing senior rugby and whether they're going to continue to be able to. The answer is yes, but we need to stick to the specific ages that are allowed, and not be involving players way earlier than, or sorry, that are way younger than is safe for them to play senior rugby. We should be finding them appropriate competitions for their age group. So just a quick sip of water before I get to the next slide. Okay, so postpone. Oh, I just clicked on it. Look at me go. So postponements. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, things don't go as planned, and previously scheduled fixture needs to be postponed. There are 4 main categories for grounds for postponement, and you can see some details about each on the slide. These 4 categories are club request, with and without proper notice, an abandoned match, and unsuitable playing conditions. The table on the slide lists who's responsible for requesting a postponement under each category and what happens if the match cannot be rescheduled. I'd like to give a couple examples so you can understand how this might work. So example 1, a club has a number of players test positive for COVID-19 the night before a game, such that they do not have a full roster for the match and request a postponement. This would fall into the second category that you see on a slide, and under the policy would default to a forfeit for the requesting club. However, positive COVID tests and self-isolation would likely constitute circumstances outside of team control, and the club should apply to the Rules of Competition Committee to have the match declared a draw. As a counterfactual, if this club's players were unavailable due to massive hangovers from the night before the match, this would not be grounds for such an application, and forfeit would be the only remedy. So just that section 9.6, circumstances outside of team control, you guys should be familiar with that in particular. Example number 2, match official arrives at the pitch to find poor air quality, checks the air quality index, and determines that the air quality is too poor to go ahead with the match. For example, the sub-unit scheduler should attempt to reschedule the match, and if such is not possible, the game will be declared a draw. If 50 minutes of the match had been played before the match was abandoned, the result would stand as it was when the game was abandoned. Okay. I just checked the time, so I'm going to try to speed up my cadence here. Hopefully, I don't go too fast, but I do want to get us out of here at a decent time. So regardless of the reason for the postponement, the first thing that you should do when receiving notice of a postponement is to log on to Sport Lomo and file a provisional team sheet for the postponed match. A provisional team sheet provides a record of who would have participated in the match if it had been played, and will be used to calculate playoff eligibility should the match not proceed. You have until 24 hours following the scheduled kickoff time to file this provisional roster. That's also part of that 2022 temporary policy, solely because we cannot set different timelines on Sport Lomo for editing a team sheet. It's 24 hours or 24 hours. We can't set 24 hours for one circumstance, 48 hours for another one. So if the match is rescheduled, the provisional team sheet will be deleted. So this is, again, provisional. It's in the name. Okay, forfeits. So now we're going to get into some of the unfortunate situations that we hope that you never have to encounter. Well, we hope that no team has to forfeit a match. You should be aware of the grounds for forfeit and some of the penalties and consequences thereof. There are 5 specific grounds for a team to forfeit a match. First is the failure of the team to fulfill, that means show up, for the scheduled match, including requesting postponement after the deadline to do so. We covered it on a previous slide, but that's 7 days for senior clubs, 2 days for junior clubs. Second is a failure to have the minimum number of players on the pitch to start the match as per the chart we reviewed previously. Third is if the team fields an ineligible or unregistered player. An example of ineligible would be a player who is suspended for a red card offense. Unregistered is self-explanatory. Fourth is a failure by the home team to provide a properly marked or equipped playing area, such that in the match official's opinion, the game must be abandoned. So an example of that might be not having post pads. That's a player safety issue. The match official might deem that that is not correct for the match to go ahead. Fifth but not least is the failure to submit a team sheet in line with the requirements of section 4.6 of the Rules of Competition and the temporary policy for the 2022 season that we've covered already. Okay. Now that we've covered the grounds for forfeit, we'll cover the consequences. Unlike the citizens of Pawnee's sister city, Baraqua, you don't need to fret about jail time. There are 3 categories of consequences for forfeiting a match: league standings penalties, financial penalties, and playoff and league entry penalties. So teams that forfeit a match will be deducted 5 table points per match forfeited. That doesn't mean you get 0 points for your match, same as if you lost. That means you get -5. The opposition in the forfeited match will be given a bonus point victory, so that's 5 points, and the match will be recorded as a 20-0 scoreline. Financial penalties, in addition to the league standings penalties that will apply, will be as follows. If you forfeit a local match, i.e. within your own city, the club will be fined, a match within your own city where no team is traveling. That's not just a home game, that is, say, 2 Regina teams playing each other at the Regina clubhouse. the club will be fined $250 for a forfeit in that kind of match. Forfeit a traveling match, such as an interlock, whether you are the home team or the away team, you will be fined $500. If you forfeit a playoff match, the club will be fined $1,000, and the 5-point deduction that we talked about previously will be applied at the start of the following season. With the financial penalties, the club needs to pay the fine by the next Sask Rugby board meeting. That's the last Wednesday of each month, or risk being placed in bad standing, which can affect future participation in sanctioned competitions. Speaking of penalties affecting participation, 2 forfeits in a season will result in a team being ineligible for playoffs in that season. Even if the team wins all of their other fixtures, you could go 8-2, but if those 2 are forfeits, you are not in the playoffs. 3 forfeits in a season means that the team will need to apply to be reinstated to the competition in the following season, which is intended to ensure that the team has a plan to avoid having the pattern of forfeited matches continue. It's not to gatekeep the league, it's to make sure that your club is in a good position, that you're not just going to keep forfeiting and putting the other teams in that situation as well. I will just mention, I thought I had written it into my notes. It is on the slide here. Those financial penalties that I mentioned do not apply to junior teams. They only apply to the senior clubs. Junior teams get the league standings penalties. They get the playoff and league entry penalties. They do not get the financial penalties. Okay. Next up is withdrawal from a competition. Again, another thing that we hope that your club doesn't need to contemplate. If you do find yourself in this scenario, here's what you need to know. As with forfeiting 3 games in a season, if you withdraw from a competition part of the way through, you need to apply to be reinstated to play in the following season. Again, the point is to ensure that you're going to be able to fulfill your fixtures in the upcoming season. Again, that you have a plan for making sure the club is going to go forward well. Before being reinstated, the club will need to pay any applicable fines as per the forfeit rules. If a team needs to withdraw from a competition, any other teams from their club, so if you have a men's and a women's division under one club, if the men's team has to withdraw, the women's team is not going to be punished. They will be able to carry on as is. What's new for 2022, though, is granting the ability for a team to withdraw from a competition without penalty if they can prove to the Rules of Competition Committee that their withdrawal from the competition is due to an accumulation of injuries. That's just bad luck, and we don't want to punish teams if they're in that terrible scenario. To claim this exemption, the club must provide a list of injured players to the committee within 24 hours of notifying the subunion of their withdrawal from the competition. So in practice, the easiest way to A, know if this applies to your team, and B, provide this list to the committee is to export a list of your current registered players, i.e. those with an active playing membership, making them eligible to play in matches, not including coaches and other non-playing members. So export that list and mark off those that are injured. There's no need to list the nature of the injury. That's private medical information. Not looking for that. You're only eligible to claim this exemption for injuries if the remaining number of non-injured players on this list is less than the minimum number of players required to start a match that we've covered previously. So to pull some numbers off the top of my head, if you're playing in a 15s competition in men's division 1, you need 12 players to start the match. If you have 36 total current registered players in Sport Lomo, you would need to have at least 25 of those players be injured in order to claim this exemption. You would need to have only 11 remaining. And that's injured specifically. No other factors can be applied in this situation. So if you're at 23 out of 36 injured, but then 2 are moving away, or they have to work that weekend, that doesn't count. You have 23 out of 36 injured. That's all that's being considered. And the committee will have the final discretion as to whether the club qualifies for this exemption. We need to make sure that there are some firm guardrails on this so that it's not being exploited by clubs. So that's out of the really negative stuff. Let's get into some other things. So after the match official was responsible for entering the game scores via Sport Lomo. No more emailing pictures of game sheets. No more just figuring out what color copy they need to do. Match officials putting that into Sport Lomo. Clubs are then responsible to review those scores and the subsequent league standings within 14 days of the match to ensure their accuracy. Game scores can be found on Sport Lomo if you view your team sheet for the match, and on the Sask Rugby website. League standings can be found on the website. So to clarify this, the 14-day limit for reporting errors only applies to scores and league standings. Any other potential violation of the rules of competition can be reported to the Rules of Competition Committee at any time prior to the start of playoffs. That's for violations occurring in the season, and any time prior to the start of the following season for violations occurring in playoffs. So your 14 days is for scores and standings errors only. Everything else has a much longer, oh crap, what's the word? Statute of limitations. Okay, playoff eligibility requirements. This one's always a fun one. So, players in senior competitions must compete in a minimum number of matches for their club in the regular season to be eligible for the playoffs. In addition to minimum numbers that you see on the slide, there are a few other criteria that need to be met for matches to count towards playoff eligibility. First, only 15-a-side matches count towards playoff eligibility. They count regardless of division, but only if they are 15-a-side. So if you're playing sevens matches in the middle of your season, they do not count. Ryback sevens coming up does not count for playoff eligibility. Second, games must be played for the club that a player is registered for. The rules prohibit playing for 2 clubs in the same competition regardless. So this one should be easy to stick to. Third, dual members who play for a Division I club and a Division II club must achieve their eligibility for these clubs separately by meeting the minimum number for both competitions. So I'll use an example. My club, the Gophers, we have a couple of players that play for PA as well. In order for those players to play in Division I playoffs with the Gophers and Division II playoffs with PA, they have to meet the minimum requirements for both of those teams. They can't play all their games with the Gophers and then just show up and play for PA in the playoffs, or vice versa. So clubs are required to keep track of their player status with regards to playoff eligibility during the season. You can use Sport Lomo to check match history for an individual player. This is something else that I can show you guys on Sport Lomo at the end. Sask Rugby will provide a list of playoff eligible players to your club after the end of the regular season, but not before. So at the end of the regular season, once all the games have been played, we create that list based on the team sheets. We send it out to your club and we post it on the website. We don't do that part of the way through the season. That's up to you guys to track yourselves. So the rules of competition policy provides 2 grounds on which players can gain an exemption for failing to meet these playoff eligibility requirements that we just talked about. The first is for players who miss club games due to representative duties. So players who miss club games to play for a rep team, for example, Saskatchewan U18 team, can claim any club games missed during the time of their representative duties, provided that they play a greater or equal number of games for the rep team during the missed time. To use a more specific example, if a player plays 3 games for the rep team and misses 4 club games during this time, they would be eligible to get credit for 3 games played, which is the lesser of the 2 numbers. Same as if those numbers are switched. If they played 3 rep games, but they only missed 2 club games, they get the lesser of those 2 numbers. Second ground is for rugby-related injuries. This specifically refers to injuries that occurred during games or team practices that prevent a player from participating in the minimum number of matches. Applicants must list the date that the injury occurred and what type of rugby activity that it occurred during on their application, in addition to the dates of the games missed. The committee may ask for more information to corroborate the initial information, and applicants may voluntarily add more information to their application. Applicants are not required to reveal their personal health information. We don't need to know that it was your left knee ACL strain. That's not the info that we're looking for. We're looking for when it happened, where it happened, like training game, what games that you missed. The nice thing about having a small rugby community, odds are with a rep from the RRU, a rep from the NSRU, and a referee rep on the committee, odds are that the committee will be able to corroborate your information pretty quickly, just given the size of our community. So again, it's unlikely that more information will be asked for, but the committee might ask for it. So any applications on these grounds must be submitted via the application form. It's linked on the slide. It's linked on the rules of competition page on the website. These applications have to be submitted at least 7 days prior to the start of playoffs. Based on the tentative schedules making the rounds that I've seen, both in the North and the South, this deadline would be August 12th, 2022 for all of the senior teams. Again, the playoff eligibility stuff isn't relevant for the junior teams. There's no playoff eligibility requirement for juniors. So the committee welcomes individuals with exceptional circumstances not covered by the aforementioned grounds to apply for an exemption. We don't want to limit this too much. If someone has compelling grounds, we want to make sure to hear them. But before just opening that can of worms, I do want to cover a list of precedents set by the committee so that you understand what items are truly quote unquote exceptional. Some common precedents for rejecting applications include applications that were submitted after that 7 day prior to playoffs deadline without a compelling reason why the deadline was missed. Oops, I forgot. Or oops, my club rep didn't tell me, not a compelling reason. Players who are not registered for the club at the time of the match is being claimed as missed, or players who are not registered for the club at the time the application is submitted. If you had a game on August 5th and you said you missed it and you want an exemption for it, if we look up on your Sport Lomo that you didn't get registered till August 20th, well, tough luck. So precedent for rejecting application, where players' personal decisions are the cause for not reaching the required number of games. For example, if you make a personal decision to move away for a month or to take a vacation resulting in missed games, that's not eligible for an exemption. Where conflicts with work scheduling or other life commitments are the cause of games being missed, and where the player maintains agency and or control over such conflicts. If you choose to go to your cousin's in-laws wife's child's birthday instead of going to the match, that's not eligible for an exemption. Another ground for, or another reason for rejecting an application would include where errors by the club, such as failing to submit a provisional team sheet, result in a player failing to meet the minimum requirements. So you guys, as the club leaders that are on the call tonight, you guys need to, that's where you guys have to hold up your end of the bargain for your players as well. So we're starting to wind it down here. We're through all of the specific rules themselves, and we're just going to go through some of the procedural pieces included at the end of the policy. First up is appeals. So appeals of a committee ruling are pretty straightforward. They must be made in writing to myself as chair of the committee and Joel as Sask Rugby president. Our emails are on the slide here. There's also a $300 fee to file an appeal that needs to be submitted before the appeal can be heard. If your appeal is successful, you'll be refunded half of that amount. So same as what the discipline policy now requires that we talked about earlier. Any appeals will be heard by a tribunal appointed by the Sask Rugby board. Okay, so pretty easy peasy. So amendments. So you might be shaking your head thinking that we need to change everything that I've just talked about. This is how you can submit amendments. So the Rules of Competition Committee can amend the policy at any time and would welcome any reasonable proposals for amendments. Those must be communicated in writing to myself as committee chair at rdo@saskrugby.com. At minimum, your proposal should include the language in the policy to be amended, the desired amended text, and the rationale for the desired amendments. The more detail you put into your proposal, the better, the easier it is for the committee to process. The committee will then do the due diligence required to ensure that the proposal is acceptable to the entire rugby community, including any required consultation with the NSRU, RU, and SRRS members. However, if you don't have a formal amendment, so if you don't know specifically, I want to change this to this, and you just want the committee to look at a topic generally, so basically a problem, but you don't have a solution for it at the moment, please just talk to me and we can decide how to move forward with it at the committee level. Pretty open and willing to hear any ideas or close any loopholes that we need to close. Generally speaking, the committee will batch any amendments to the policy and put them forward for approval in February or March, when the rules for the coming season will be finalized. Any amendments recommended by the committee must be approved by the Sask Rugby board. So this year, for example, the amendments were put forward to the board in February and approved, and that's why we're doing this presentation now in March. So my voice will thank me. That brings us to the end, and hopefully if you guys have some questions, we have some time to stick around and answer them. We've tried to be very, very thorough with the information that we've given you tonight, but we want to make sure that you have opportunity for any questions that maybe you brought in or haven't had a chance to ask yet. So I will shut up, let my voice rest, and you guys can ask any questions that you have.
I got a couple questions.
Yep.
When we talked about submitting the game sheets, you have 24 hours to make sure they're right. Whose responsibility is it to submit that final game sheet?
So you will have to decide that within your organization. So you will have, as a member organization, you'll be set up within Sport Lomo. Whoever has admin access for your account is going to be the one with access to file that team sheet.
I'm not thinking about the roster. I'm thinking about the final score. Who submits the final score?
The referee.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And another one about rosters. Quite often, we'll travel and we'll get to a game, and one team will have 16 players, the other team will have 8, and quite often we'll just lend 3 or 4 players to the other team. What do we do with the roster there? Do we just leave them on their original team, or do we scratch them off ours and put them on the other roster?
So within Sport Lomo, if it is just a, lending the player for the day so that we can have a game, there's a guest player function.
Okay.
So you need to get their member ID in Sport Lomo from their actual. So I guess if you have the player that's being lended, you would have the member ID, you would give it to the other team, they would list them as a guest player, and vice versa if the player was going the other way. If a player is going to play for two different clubs, so that's commonly in our Division 1, Division 2 structure, they need to use that dual membership option, and then they will show up in both clubs' rosters for their team sheet. Okay, I see in the chat, do the attachments or rules of competition outline the process to get an exhibition match sanctioned with an incoming touring side? No, they do not, because an exhibition match is not a Sask Rugby sanctioned competition. That is insured through Rugby Canada. If you give me a second, I will pull you up the link about where to find the application for sanctioning for that type of match, though. Christy, I see your hand up.
It's for a different question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Or okay, cool.
I'll just pull up the link as you're asking it. So ask away.
So my question's pertaining to the withdrawal from competition slide. Is that specifically for games or for the season?
That is if you are withdrawing your team from the competition for the entire season.
Okay.
So let's say you get halfway through your schedule and you say, oh crap, we have all of our players are injured. We no longer can play the rest of the games that we are scheduled to play. Okay.
So what is the deciding point that a team is committed to the season?
Well, that's up to your sub-union to decide whether or not they put you on the schedule.
Okay, so if they're placed on the schedule, then that would be pretty much they're in the season? Or do you need to clarify specifically?
I think
so. The sub-unions handle all the scheduling.
Andrew,
and
I can answer that. If they've paid their sub-union dues and entered the league, and been placed on the schedule, then I think that they've committed.
Okay.
Janet?
I believe it's different for the women's clubs, though. They're scheduled through Sask Rugby, are they not?
I know that like Dinger used to do the schedule for women's interlocks, and then Regina has had a separate sevens like league that they do.
Yeah, fair enough.
Any other questions? I just threw that link for sanctioning exhibition matches in the chat. That's also where you go to purchase tournament sanctioning as well.
I have one more question about sanctioning also. I'm hoping to run a few U14 girls camps. A lot of them will probably be coming out of the 12 and under flag competition, so they won't be insured for tackle rugby. How will I have to get those sanctioned? And if I do, is there a fee? And where does the money come from for that?
Okay, I'm just thinking this through. So you've got 12 and so athletes that you're putting into intro to contact as part of a U14 program. You're hosting a tri-rugby, I shouldn't say tri-rugby. You're hosting a camp for those athletes. So that wouldn't be a tri-rugby event. That would be a practice or a training. I think the biggest thing that you need to worry about there, Rufus, is the safety of your participants and what they are permitted to do within the age grade law variations. So when you go back to that slide and access that document after it's sent out, and I think I shared that with the minor and junior program leads last time we had one of those meetings. That's your biggest concern. I believe your sanctioning wise would be covered as a training. And as long as all your athletes themselves are registered and insured, that your training would be covered. So just for context, to spool it back a little bit, the senior clubs, as an example, your training is implicitly sanctioned when you have registered as a club with Sask Rugby and all of your players are registered and insured. Practices and training that you have are implicitly insured and sanctioned as well. That's a big, going way too deep in the weeds on insurance, but applying that back out to the U14, if that is a registered club/team, their training is implicitly sanctioned provided all the athletes are properly registered and insured. So that's why I say your biggest concern is about the contact and whether those athletes are able to actually participate in that based on the age grade law variations and the type of registration that they are carrying. Because if they're carrying a 12-week non-contact flag registration, they would not be insured to participate in contact rugby.
Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to get around is if they've registered for the flag, but they want to try some tackle with the possibility of maybe traveling to Brandon for the 14 and under Mansask, how do they get insured for that to try tackling?
I'm going to have to take that one back for you, Rufus.
Okay. I can
That's
jump
fine.
in there, Andrew. That's Rufus, right? I would recommend you take advantage of the shorter term membership options available. My club, for example, has been using like the 72-hour or 2-week tackle memberships for people looking to try things out. That's what those are for. But like under no circumstances can they do tackle with a flag registration. So you'll have to upgrade that to some degree. But it could be like you could upgrade it to a 72-hour tackle membership, which is, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's pretty reasonably priced. The way Rugby Canada's upgrading works, you will only ever pay the highest amount owed. So like it's possible if they've got a year touch membership, it's possible they don't have to pay anything to upgrade for a 72-hour tackle. It's just a matter of doing the paperwork. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but like they'll never have to pay more than the max.
I'm pulling up the categories and fees document just to share in the chat as well.
I don't believe the Try Rugby days are tackle things.
Yes, that's why I don't suggest that as an option, because the Try Rugby Day sanctioning, which just for everybody's context, each club, each registered member organization can apply for one free Try Rugby Day, and any subsequent Try Rugby Days are $50 a piece for that sanctioning, but that is only for non-contact activities. You can run a Try Rugby Day as part of a contact session. So if a senior club was running a practice, you could designate it as a Try Rugby Day and have people come out who are not carrying insurance, but they could not participate in contact activities. If you have more questions about Try Rugby Day specifically, ask me outside of the call and we can go over what you are and are not allowed to do with them. I definitely encourage your clubs to use them though, especially given that Rugby Canada will let you have the first one for free.
I'm just gonna jump in here, Christy, I see your hand. I'm aware you're waiting. Just give me 1 second. It's kind of a relevant time to mention. I see a lot of clubs on social media doing, you know, come join us for the spring. Everyone does it. It is absolutely imperative that any individual that steps onto the field with your club is registered in some capacity. There is zero insurance for somebody coming to your training session and taking part without having registered. And I know sometimes it's difficult to recruit players if they're like, yeah, I'll come give it a try. And then you're like, well, it's $50. I can say that what my club did is we, at a board level, we passed a motion that if we have a random person that wants to come try it for a day, our club actually covers the 72-hour membership for someone trying it out one time. And that's how we kind of continue to encourage people to try rugby while keeping them insured. I know it's difficult. We slipped a couple times even, but it's one person that's not insured on the field is a significant liability risk.
Yeah. So to add on to that, first, those try rugby day sanctioning options that I mentioned are exactly what you should be using if you are advertising. This is getting aside from the rules competition, but if you are advertising to the community a free come try rugby event where they don't have to pay, you should be applying for sanctioning for a try rugby day event. Remember, they still can't participate in contact, but that is how you can make sure that you are covered liability wise.
Yeah,
Number two is that Joel mentioned that an unregistered player at your training is a massive liability risk, not just if that player gets injured, but if anybody gets injured. The way the National Insurance Program works is that everybody involved in a sanctioned event has to be properly registered. If I show up unregistered to a team's practice and something goes wrong, nobody has insurance coverage in that situation because I was there unregistered. Again, we're getting a little bit outside the rules of competition, but these are good things for you guys to know as club leaders. If there's nothing else on that specific topic though, maybe we'll get to Chrissy's question.
Hey, hopefully this is the last one. My big question was age grade laws again. Is that just specific to games? Or like, are juniors allowed to practice with senior club teams?
Okay.
I have no idea.
So that's not the age grade law variations, that's the age banding. So your age banding, and it's specifically with contact, you should be following those age banding guidelines even in practice. So I had mentioned somebody who's born in 2006 should not be playing senior rugby. They also shouldn't be participating in contact training with senior rugby players. Non-contact, cool. Contact, not cool.
Okay, so we could use like a bag or something for a contact for them if there's like a weird number or something like that, but they could practice with us on the regular.
Yeah, or if you have multiple ones, as long as they're only, multiple underage players, as long as they're only participating in contact with people in their age band, that will be another kind of quote unquote workaround.
Okay, awesome. And then just the last thing, I think I saw Taylor Lichinsky had a really good question in the chat that I was also curious about.
Okay. Sorry, let me go back up. I'd answered the one about coaching requirements for minor. Is that the one that you're mini/minor? Is that what you're referring to, Chrissy?
Yeah, because I know that minis normally gets like volunteer, like parents and whatnot to come in and help out. So do they need all of those requirements as well?
Okay, so I'll just repeat. So the rules of competition and those coaching requirements are for sanctioned competitions. There are no sanctioned minor/minis competitions. So they're technically not required to have those certifications, but I strongly recommend it. Not only because they protect you for liability cases, but also they are free. Other than the registration as a coach in sport Lomo, but the World Rugby modules, Respect and Sport, are free and they are self-directed on your own time. You're not beholden to anybody else to complete them. So I strongly recommend even coaches at the minor level are getting them. Parent who wants to volunteer and help out, just send them with some homework so that they're a little bit more informed about what they're getting into.
Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, good. I'm going to go pass out then.
Awesome. Okay, so well, thank you everybody. And I'll just end off by saying, always open to questions, comments, thoughts. Feel free to contact me at any time, whether it's rules of competition or just rugby generally. My inbox is open. So thanks everybody for coming out and hope you all have a great evening.
Just same goes for me. We are RDO at saskrugby.com and president at saskrugby.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel.